Tonight, let us begin not with a trumpet, not with a burning city, not with shields ringing under a hard bronze sky, but with a man sitting quietly beside the sea. The war behind him is already famous. The victories of kings and the ruin of Troy have already passed into song. Yet none of that is what presses most deeply upon him now. What sits with him on that lonely shore is something smaller, gentler, and more painful than glory. It is homesickness. It is the ache of wanting one particular hearth, one particular bed, one particular voice in the half-light of evening. It is the hunger not to be admired by the world, but to be known again by the few people who matter. For years he has seen wonders that other men would have traded their lives to behold. He has stood in palaces bright with metal and torchlight. He has crossed waters that seem to lead to the rim of creation. He has been offered comfort, pleasure, safety, even the strange temptation of a life without death. And still, when day leans toward evening, his thoughts return to one small island of stone and olive trees in the western sea. Ithaca is not the richest place in the world. It is not the grandest. Its hills are rough, its harbours modest, its soil never easy. But for him, it is threaded through with the invisible ties that make a place more than a place. A father once walked there, a wife waits there, a son grew there without him. His own name has roots there. A man may wander through marvels and still remain incomplete until he can stand again where his life first took shape. That is the quiet centre of the long old story we are entering tonight. The tale we call the Odyssey is often remembered for monsters, storms, enchantresses, prophecies and trials scattered across the dark blue map of the ancient world. All of those are here. They matter. They give the journey its danger and its grandeur. But beneath them runs a current older and deeper than adventure. It is the current of return. It is the question of whether a person can travel far away, suffer greatly, change almost beyond recognition, and still find a path back to the life that once felt like home. And perhaps that is why this ancient story still rests so naturally against the minds of modern listeners. Even now, in a world of airplanes, glowing screens, shifting borders and restless motion, the old longing has not changed. People leave and return, soldiers come back altered by what they have seen, children grow up waiting for absent fathers, home survive as memory long after they have ceased to exist in the same form. Sometimes what we long for is a place, and sometimes it is the self we were before distance and suffering took their turn at shaping us. The Odyssey understands that home is never just geography. Home is recognition. Home is relation. Home is the rare blessing of being met by those who can still say, with certainty, you belong here. So we will take this journey slowly. We will not hurry to the monsters. We will not rush headlong toward the harshest parts of the tale. We will allow the sea to widen around us, one quiet mile at a time. We will sit for a while beside this exhausted man and understand why his tears matter more than his victories. If you are settling in for the night, you may simply let the old rhythm of the waves keep time for you while the story unfolds. He is not weeping because he has failed to conquer the world. He is weeping because he has not yet finished the simpler, harder task of becoming himself again in the place that first gave him shape. And before we follow him over the water, it is only fair that we turn our eyes toward the island that has been waiting for him all these years. The island where memory has not been resting peacefully at all. Because this is not, in the deepest sense, a story about conquest. The greatest heroic poems of the ancient world often burn with the hunger for fame. They linger over battle lines, over kings striving to outshine other kings. over the bright, dangerous promise that a short life might still be made immortal in song. This story remembers war, but it does not love war in the same way. It begins after the brightest fires have gone out. It speaks to the quieter hours that come afterward, when surviving has become more difficult than winning, and when the heart turns away from public glory toward private restoration. Long before the poem was written down, people carried it in memory and in voice. It lived first in the breath of singers, in halls where listeners gathered to hear of the old age of heroes. Generations repeated it, reshaped it, handed it on. By the time it settled into the form we know, the world that had produced its earliest memories was already partly lost. Palaces had fallen, networks of trade had broken, cities had changed, kingdoms had thinned or vanished. The story survived that collapse because it offered more than the record of one man's adventures. It preserved a way of thinking about order and disorder, about hospitality, piety, family loyalty, and the fragile threads that bind a household together when the center has been torn away. There is a gentle comfort in remembering that even the people of the distant past knew how easily a life could come apart. They knew what it meant for war to outlast reason. They knew that a house could seem intact from the outside while authority, trust, and abundance slowly leaked away within. They knew that the hardest journeys did not always begin when the ship left harbor. Sometimes they began when everyone expected the traveler to return in a matter of weeks, and then the weeks became years, and then the years began to feel like a different kind of death. The man at the center of this tale is Odysseus, king of Ithaca, a figure known in ancient story not primarily for size or beauty or brute force, but for alertness of mind. He is clever, patient when he must be, deceptive when he needs to be, and capable of turning disaster aside by finding the one narrow path that others fail to see. Yet the very gift that preserves him will also wound him. Intelligence can become pride, resourcefulness can turn into overconfidence. A man who is very good at shaping events may begin to believe he can always control the cost of what he sets in motion. Part of what makes this old poem endure is that its hero is never simply admirable. He is recognizably human. He is faithful and erring, self-disciplined and impulsive, tender and dangerous, honest in his love of home, yet capable of deep concealment. And because the story understands him so well, it does not place him alone against the horizon and let everything else blur into insignificance. A return only matters if something remains to be returned to. So around him, the poem builds an entire world of waiting. A wife maintaining herself inside uncertainty. A son growing upward through the space left by a father. Old servants proving that loyalty sometimes survives longer than power. And a house learning what happens when no one strong enough is present to draw its rooms back into order. We will move through all of this with an easy hand. We will let the old names arrive naturally. We will keep our attention on the emotional shape beneath the events. The sea may be dark, the gods may be capricious, strange creatures may appear at the edges of the voyage, but if we listen carefully, what we will hear beneath everything is simpler than myth. We will hear the sound of a home under strain, and the sound of a man trying to become equal through suffering to the life he once took for granted. And to understand that strain, we have to look now toward Ithaca itself, not as a destination on a map, but as a household slowly losing the order that once held it together. Ithaca does not resemble the magnificent cities that later generations liked to imagine when they thought of heroic kings. It is not a place of endless wealth, nor does it glitter with imperial scale. Its beauty is harder, barer, and perhaps for that reason more intimate. It rises from the sea in rough folds of rock and scrub and silver leaf. The paths are narrow, the fields demand labour, the winds do not flatter. Yet it is exactly the kind of homeland that enters the body and remains there. A person raised among those ridges could recognize their line even after years at sea. He could carry the smell of the earth in memory. He could dream of the angle of light on stone terraces. He could miss it the way one misses a face. But while Odysseus has been absent, Ithaca has not been resting in noble silence. His hall still stands, his stores still exist, his servants still rise and work. His wife still lives beneath the same roof. And yet the centre has gone slack. For years now, young aristocrats from Ithaca and from neighbouring islands have crowded his home, eating, drinking, competing for the hand of Penelope, and behaving as though the king's long absence has already erased his claim. They are called suitors, and on the surface the word sounds ceremonial, almost respectable. In practice they are closer to elegant parasites. They feast on livestock that is not theirs, command servants who do not belong to them, laugh in the rooms another man built, and assume that prolonged uncertainty gives them permission to turn a household crisis into their private carnival. Their offence is not merely personal, it is structural. In the ancient world, a great house was not only a family residence, it was an economic centre, a place of redistribution, hospitality, judgment, memory, and prestige. Goods flowed inward from fields, flocks, and herds, then outward again through meals. Gifts, wages, sacrifices, and ceremonial obligations. Such a house depended on hierarchy, but also on reciprocity. One could be host or guest, master or servant, father or child, but each role carried expectations. The suitors violate those expectations constantly. They consume without gratitude. They threaten without shame. They occupy the place of honoured guests while stripping the honour from the role itself. A house that should have gathered people into mutual recognition has become instead a stage for entitlement. And this daily entitlement has consequences more serious than noise and irritation. Wealth built slowly over generations thins away. Animals are slaughtered faster than they can be replaced. Servants adjust to a new centre of power, or pretend to. Fear and calculation enter ordinary routines. Every meal becomes a small drain on the future. Every day of delay asks the same painful question: how much of a kingdom can be eaten before anyone finally admits that the king might never return? The old men of the island are weak in the face of this encroaching disorder. Malhone, Telemachus. They see, they mutter, they do little. Perhaps they are tired, perhaps they fear conflict. Perhaps they have lived so long in the shadow of heroic reputations that they no longer know how to act when decisiveness is required of them. Whatever the cause, their passivity deepens the crisis. When legitimate authority recedes and no community rises strongly enough to protect its own customs, the result is not freedom. It is predation disguised as normal life. All of this makes Ithaca feel strangely suspended, as though it has been held between seasons for too long. The king is absent but not confirmed dead. The queen is pressured but not yielded. The heir is of age and yet not fully empowered. The servants continue their tasks while waiting to see whose favour will matter tomorrow. It is the kind of atmosphere in which every gesture acquires meaning. A look across the hall, a delayed answer, the handling of a cup, the giving or withholding of bread. These become political acts in miniature. This is the homeland toward which Odysseus keeps turning in thought. Not a fixed paradise preserved without him, but a place under pressure, a place still his, and yet increasingly difficult to reclaim. Home, in other words, is not waiting passively. It is changing even as he longs for it. That is part of what makes return so uncertain. One may survive all the seas in the world, and still arrive too late for the life one meant to recover. And at the heart of this strained island household stand two figures who have each been carrying the burden of waiting in a different key. A son learning manhood in the shadow of an absence, and a wife practicing endurance with the precision of an art. Telemachus has grown up inside a story that belongs to him and yet never fully includes him. He knows he is the son of Odysseus. Everyone around him knows it too. The knowledge does not steady him, it unsettles him. His father is less a daily memory than a reputation, a shape made of other people's recollections, songs, guesses, and comparisons. The young prince has inherited a name before he has inherited authority. He sits in the hall among men who consume his future, and because he has never been allowed the simple apprenticeship of growing up beside a father, he wavers between resentment, longing, and uncertainty. There is something especially sad about a youth becoming self-conscious under the eyes of people who do not respect him. Had Odysseus returned quickly from Troy, Telemachus might have matured into confidence by imitation, as sons often do. He might have learned the weight of a decision by hearing decisions made. He might have watched a man command his own hall, and then tried, awkwardly at first, to do the same. Instead, he has known only half-formed authority, a mother protecting him, servants pitying him, and suitors mocking him. He dreams of his father's return, not only because he loves the absent man, but because that return would release him from the burden of being measured against an ideal he never had the chance to study closely. And yet, some growth can happen only under pressure. The poem understands this with great tenderness. Telemachus is not useless, he is unstarted. He needs a first act, he needs the moment when private frustration hardens into public speech. That moment comes when the goddess Athena, who favours his father and has not forgotten the house of Ithaca, stirs him gently toward himself. She does not simply hand him courage, she calls it forth. She appears in a trusted form, speaks in practical terms, and pushes him toward a task, small enough to attempt and large enough to change him. Summon the assembly, say aloud what everyone already knows, ask for a ship, and go seek news. It is striking that Telemachus first grows not by winning a fight, but by standing up in public and refusing silence. When he speaks before the Ithacans, he is still vulnerable. The suitors answer with mockery, the older men offer little help. No immediate miracle follows, but the important thing has already happened. He has crossed the inner threshold between waiting to be rescued and acting in the absence of certainty. Such moments rarely look glorious from the outside. They may seem hesitant, even insufficient, yet they are often the truest beginnings of adulthood. His journey away from Ithaca is modest in distance when compared with his father's vast wandering, but emotionally it matters just as much. He visits older kings who fought beside Odysseus. He is welcomed with the hospitality that has vanished from his own home. He listens to stories of his father's intelligence, endurance, and reputation, and gradually, almost without noticing, he begins to inhabit his own role more fully. The son who left in uncertainty returns with greater tact, greater restraint, and greater awareness of how a house ought to function when dignity and order have not been driven from it. The change is quiet, which is fitting. This is a poem that values dramatic recognitions, but it also understands slower transformation. Telemachus does not come home from his little voyage as a perfect hero. He returns as something more believable and in its own way more moving. A young man no longer content to remain a child in his father's hall. And while he is learning how to speak and move, like the son of a king. His mother has been practicing a different, older, more exhausting kind of skill. The art of holding time still without appearing to resist it. Penelope is often remembered simply as the faithful wife, and there is truth in that memory, but it is not enough. Fidelity, in her case, is not a passive quality. It is work, it is management, it is emotional discipline, maintained over years of pressure. To remain loyal in easy circumstances is admirable. To remain loyal while surrounded daily by men who eat your goods, flatter your face, calculate your weakness, and watch for the first sign of surrender is something fiercer and more intelligent than the word faithful can fully contain. Her situation would be hard in any age. In hers it is nearly impossible. She is neither wife in the ordinary living sense, nor widow in the socially legible one. No confirmed death has freed her to remarry honourably, and no returning husband has re-established the public authority that would silence the suitors. Her son is growing, but for many years he has not been strong enough to command a hall on his own. So Penelope lives in a corridor of uncertainty that narrows around her year after year, and within that narrowing space she creates room to maneuver. Her famous stratagem with the burial shroud is beautiful, not merely because it delays the suitors, but because it uses the accepted labour of women to resist the fate those same social expectations would otherwise impose on her. By day she weaves, by night she secretly unweaves. Outwardly she appears industrious, dutiful, devoted to proper obligations toward the old father of her absent husband. Inwardly she is buying time, making thread itself serve uncertainty. It is one of the loveliest acts of resistance in ancient literature, not because it is loud, but because it is so perfectly suited to the kind of power available to her. She cannot command soldiers, she cannot publicly challenge every man in the hall, but she can make domestic skill into political delay, and in doing so she proves herself a true counterpart to her husband. His cunning moves through storms and danger, hers moves through rooms, textiles, glances, and postponed decision. She weeps, yes, she grieves openly at times, but even her grief has function. It keeps memory alive, it prevents the house from reorganizing itself too easily around her remarriage. Sorrow becomes a form of continuity to modern ears that may sound bleak, yet the poem presents it as morally and emotionally coherent. Penelope refuses the speed with which the surrounding world would like to transform her from wife into prize. Her tears say, again and again, that what is unresolved will not be treated as settled simply because others are impatient. At the same time, she's no marble emblem of constancy. She's tired, she's lonely, she measures men, she tests possibilities. She uses courtesy where she cannot use force. She accepts gifts from the suitors because gifts can be turned back against them. Evidence that their splendor is still dependent upon the woman who has not yet agreed to reward them. She listens, questions, and weighs. In another kind of poem, she might have been flattened into an ideal. Here she remains alive, intelligent, and emotionally complex. There is quiet tragedy in the fact that Penelope must preserve the household, partly by becoming stranger to ordinary rest. She cannot simply relax into sorrow, she must administer it. She must hold the line in a house where the line shifts daily. She must remain recognizably noble in the eyes of the very people who are helping to consume her future. And because she does this without spectacle, the effort can almost disappear into its own composure. It is worth pausing to notice it. Endurance has a sound. Often it is not thunderous at all. It is the sound of a woman answering carefully in a crowded room. It is the sound of thread passing through fingers. It is the sound of one more day bought without open collapse. What makes her truly remarkable is that she does not preserve only her husband's claim. She preserves her own judgment. She refuses to let circumstance decide for her before she herself has decided. In that sense, her fidelity is not simply devotion to Odysseus. It is devotion to a version of reality in which she still has the right to know, to choose, to test, and to resist. And because a household is more than its ruling family, the strain she bears spreads outward into every other life attached to the house. Through kitchens and storerooms, through animal pens and outbuildings, through the hearts of servants who must guess each day where loyalty will still be worth the cost. A great house is never only the people whose names survive in legend. Around the king, queen, and heir, there are always other lives, less celebrated but no less real. The nurse who carried the child before he could walk, the swineherd who knows the moods of winter and the rhythms of hunger, the serving women who clear tables and wash linen, the herdsmen in the hills, the field hands, the old retainers who remember earlier seasons of abundance. All of them live inside the weather of the royal household. When the center grows unstable, they feel the shifting first. In Ithaca, the signs of strain are everywhere. Some servants remain profoundly loyal to the absent king, not because power favors that loyalty, but because memory does. They remember what the house was when order still flowed outward from it. They remember gifts given properly, tasks assigned fairly, the dignity of belonging to something larger than appetite. Others begin to lean toward the suitors, whether from fear, convenience, desire, or the practical assumption that long absence eventually becomes a kind of death. Still, others try simply to survive by keeping their heads down and their labor useful. It is easy to judge these smaller figures from the calm distance of later ages. The poem, to its credit, does not entirely simplify them. Pressure reveals character, yes, but it also reveals vulnerability. The spaces of the house themselves begin to testify against its present condition. The hall, which should be a place of measured ceremony, of eating under rules, of welcoming guests, hearing petitions, and marking occasions of significance, has become instead a room of repetition. Feast after feast after feast, laughter gone sour from overuse, cups lifted by men who have never earned the right to sit so comfortably beneath that roof. Doors open to too much traffic, stores dwindling, privacy thinned. A building designed for order now absorbs disorder into its very rhythm. Even the herds beyond the palace walls are affected. Animals that ought to have marked the slow continuity of generations are consumed as though tomorrow need not be planned for. This too matters. In a deeply agrarian world, waste is not abstract. A herd does not reappear because men were careless at dinner. It must be bred, guarded, fed, sheltered, and led across seasons. To slaughter irresponsibly is to steal, not just from the present master, but from the future shape of the household itself. And perhaps no image captures the emotional cost of this slow decline more tenderly than the old dog Argos. Once he would have run with the king on the hunt, once his body would have been taut, his nose keen, his whole being aligned with the shared joy of pursuit. Now he lies neglected on a heap, aged almost beyond motion, carrying in his thin frame the history of all the years in which proper care has faded from the edges of the house. He is not merely a dog in the story, he is a little living emblem of what prolonged absence does to loyalty when loyalty is left without protection. There is something restful, in a sorrowful way, about seeing how honestly the old poem attends to these outer rings of household life. It does not pretend that kingship is only crowns and speeches. It understands that authority is tested by how bread is distributed, how animals are kept, how strangers are received, how the old and the weak are treated, how work continues when no audience is present. We are shown a kingdom from the inside out, and because of that, the eventual return will matter not only as a personal reunion, but as the reknitting of a whole damaged fabric. For now, though, the fabric remains frayed. Ithaca waits, Telemachus grows, Penelope endures. Servants divide in spirit, animals are consumed. Rooms remember better days, and far away, beyond every ridge of his homeland, Odysseus himself is still held in a place where comfort has become a subtle form of captivity. So let us leave the troubled hall for a little while, and go back out across the water, to the island where the long return has stalled in a gentler, stranger kind of sorrow. When we finally find Odysseus himself, he is not in the middle of action. He is not shouting commands, devising plans, or escaping immediate danger. He is sitting by the shore, Calypso's island, and he is crying. That image matters. It strips away the glamour that later ages often attach too quickly to the wandering hero. Before he can resume the outward movement of his life, we must see him in stillness, and in stillness he is unmistakably a man worn thin by duration. Calypso's island is beautiful in the way only divine places can be. Trees are rich with fragrance. Springs move cleanly through the landscape. The cave of the goddess glows with craft and warmth. Food is plentiful. Shelter is secure. Nothing outwardly resembles hardship. More than that, Calypso herself is not a crude monster or mindless tormentor. She desires him. She tends him. She offers him the kind of future mortals are supposed to envy. Safety without end, youth preserved, death postponed indefinitely. It would be easy to imagine such an offer as the conclusion of desire. For Odysseus, it becomes proof that desire can be misunderstood. Because what is a life, if not its ties? What is immortality worth if it floats free of the mortal relations through which character acquires shape? On Calypso's island, Odysseus can continue existing. He cannot continue being fully himself. No father will know his fate. No son will stand beside him. No wife will hear his voice in the next room. His story will stop among humans, even while his body endures. The island offers comfort, but at the price of context. It asks him to survive by consenting to become unmoored from the network of obligations, memories, griefs, and recognitions that once gave his name substance. This is why his longing on that shore feels so profound. He does not reject paradise because he is incapable of pleasure. He rejects it because pleasure, severed from relation, becomes strangely hollow. He would rather be mortal in his own world than deathless in someone else's dream. In that choice, the poem says something very beautiful about human limitation. Mortality is painful, but it also makes attachment meaningful. A hearth matters because time moves. A marriage matters because the years pass through two people who keep choosing one another. A homeland matters because it gathers the finite life of a finite person into durable form. Calypso herself becomes more interesting the more gently we look at her. She is not unfeeling. She knows what she is losing. When the gods finally order her to release him, she speaks with bitterness about the double standards of Olympus. Male gods may pursue mortal women with little scandal, but let a goddess love a mortal man, and suddenly divine order remembers its boundaries. Her complaint does not undo the fact that Odysseus must leave, yet it gives the episode an aftertaste more complicated than mere rescue. Even immortals, the poem suggests, are not free of loneliness. And so the departure is prepared. The goddess provides tools. Odysseus builds the raft with his own hands. He works the timber, binds the pieces, shapes for himself the fragile thing that must carry him back into uncertainty. This detail is easy to pass over, but it matters deeply. He is not simply delivered toward home by mercy, he labors toward it. Even at the moment of release, return remains partly craft, partly endurance, partly grace. When at last he pushes off from the island, the scene carries a hush over it. A man leaves safety because safety has become exile. A goddess watches him go. The sea opens. Ahead there is no promise of ease. Only movement, yet movement itself is already a kind of healing. Better the dangerous path that leads toward one's own life than the painless one that erases it. For a little while, the winds seem willing to let him continue. The raft moves, days pass, the horizon holds, but the sea, like memory, does not remain tranquil for long, and the god who has not forgiven him is about to notice that the man he hates is once again upon his waters. Poseidon sees him, and the calm ends at once. In the old imagination of the poem, the sea is never only weather. It is personality, anger, memory, and force braided together. Odysseus once blinded the Cyclops Polyphemus, who was Poseidon's son, and in naming himself afterward, with reckless pride, he gave the sea god a target for vengeance. The offense has not faded. Divine resentment, unlike mortal temper, is patient. It may wait across seasons and still strike with fresh fury. The storm that follows is not simply a difficult stretch of water. It is annihilating pressure. Winds collide from different directions, waves lift themselves into walls, clouds descend and blur all measure. The raft that Odysseus built so carefully begins to come apart, under a violence far beyond craft. One plank tears free, then another, ropes strain, the whole structure shudders as though the sea has found the exact shape of the man's remaining hope and wishes to break it piece by piece. Yet this is one of the moments in which the poem shows most clearly what kind of hero Odysseus is. He does not prevail by matching force with greater force. There is nothing he can do to outmuscle a storm sent by a god. Instead, he adapts downward. He gives up what cannot be preserved. He lets go of one level of control in order to save a deeper one. When the raft is shattered, he clings to what remains. When garments weigh him down, he casts them off. He studies the coastline through spray and darkness and looks, not for triumph, but for the least impossible landing. It is a humbler kind of greatness than the battlefield offers, but perhaps a more enduring one. The sea goddess Ino takes pity on him and gives him a veil to keep him afloat. Even here, the poem balances aid and exertion with unusual honesty. Divine help arrives, yes, but it does not eliminate the need for human struggle. Odysseus must still endure the water, still choose, still swim, still suffer. Grace does not cancel effort. It preserves the possibility that effort may matter. For 2 days and nights he fights the sea. That phrase sounds tidy from a distance. Yet one should try to feel its reality. Salt in the mouth, limbs trembling from repeated impact, no firm ground, no uninterrupted rest, only the body continuing because the mind refuses, one breath at a time, to surrender the claim of home. In such moments, a man is reduced to essentials. No courtly speech, no polished strategy, no household identity, simply the raw work of remaining alive within indifferent immensity. When land finally draws near, it does not at first offer welcome. Jagged rocks wait where the surf hammers hardest. Safety is visible and still inaccessible, which is one of the cruelest forms difficulty can take. Odysseus has to think even now, choosing not merely shore, but the right shore. the inlet where a river softens the sea's assault and gives him some chance of crawling into the human world again without being smashed against stone. His arrival on land feels almost like a second birth. He drags himself from the water, he lies gasping, he kisses the earth, and then, because the body that has endured must finally rest, he makes for himself the simplest shelter imaginable beneath intertwined olive growth, part wild and part cultivated, as though the very branches above him held together the two realms he has been moving between, nature and civilization, danger and belonging, the wide unknown and the shaped domestic world for which he still longs. He buries himself in leaves like a creature seeking winter sleep. Aye, it is one of the tenderest images in the whole journey. The great wanderer, reduced for a night to a hidden animal at the edge of the world, is at last able to sleep. No palace, no bed carved by hands, no watching servant, no wife beside him, only earth and foliage and darkness. Yet even this rough shelter is mercy, because it is not suspension. It is passage. He has left divine captivity behind. He has survived sea-born wrath. He is lying now on mortal soil again, and whatever comes next will lead him not backward into stasis, but onward into contact. And what comes next is not Ithaca yet, but another kind of threshold, a place where a battered stranger must remember how to enter human society gently, humbly, and without causing fear. Morning comes with a freshness. The poem lingers over, as though after so much exhaustion, the world itself wishes to begin again in cleaner lines. Nearby, the Princess Nausicaa has come to the river with her attendants to wash clothing. It is an ordinary activity touched by divine prompting, which is typical of this epic at its best. The gods do not always tear open the sky. Sometimes they merely tilt a dream, nudge a timing, guide two paths to cross at exactly the necessary hour. Odysseus emerges from the brush in a condition that would alarm any well-bred young woman. He is salt-stiff, naked, gaunt with ordeal, and barely restored from collapse. Yet here the poem demonstrates again that civilization, in its deepest form, is made not of ornament, but of response. The attendants scatter. Nausicaa, strengthened by Athena, stands her ground. Odysseus, for his part, knows how to reduce the threat of his own appearance through language. He does not rush toward her, he does not seize, he chooses distance, posture, and carefully modulated speech. In a few respectful sentences, he makes himself legible again, not as danger, but as a supplicant. This moment is lovely, because it reminds us that after enough hardship, a person must relearn not only confidence, but gentleness. Survival alone does not restore social being. Odysseus has spent years among dangers, where suspicion was prudent and force often necessary. Now he must shift registers. He must speak within the moral order of hospitality, rely upon grace, and trust that refinement still exists somewhere in the world. Nausicaa answers him with the quiet composure of someone raised properly. She arranges for clothing, food, oil, directions. She thinks of appearances. She instructs him how to approach her parents so that help may be given with least discomfort to all involved. Already, before he even reaches the palace, the tone changes. Phaeacia feels like a sheltered borderland between myth and home. It is prosperous, serene, almost improbably orderly after the brutal unpredictability of the sea. The king and queen receive the stranger according to custom. He is fed before being interrogated. He is given rest before biography. For listeners who have been moving through danger, this kind of hospitality produces a special easing. One can feel the nervous system of the story exhale. The palace itself glows with a nearly dreamlike abundance, yet, unlike Calypso's island, this abundance does not isolate. It gathers. There are songs, games, conversation, attention, and room for a man to recover his shape among others. Odysseus even participates in athletic contest when provoked, reminding us that his suffering has not erased his underlying vigor. Still, the most important event in Phaeacia is not a feat of strength, but a wound reopened through song. When the bard sings of Troy, of old quarrels, of stratagem and fire, and the grief-laden honour of the past, Odysseus weeps behind his cloak. It is one of the most psychologically true moments in the poem. Sometimes the past is hardest to bear when voiced beautifully. A song can undo the containment by which a person has survived. The king notices. He does not expose the stranger cruelly. He asks instead the necessary question with tact. Who are you? And what grief is this that music awakens? That question marks a turning point. Up to now, Odysseus has been surviving, hiding, enduring, being carried forward by circumstance. In Phaeacia, he begins again to narrate himself, and narration is not a small thing. To tell one's story coherently after chaos is already to reclaim agency from suffering. It is to gather scattered years into sequence and meaning. It is to say, in effect, I have not only been acted upon, I can still shape what is remembered and how it is understood. So, in that bright hall, among listeners willing to hear him, Odysseus speaks his name at last and begins to unfold the years between Troy and this moment. We have rested long enough to receive it. The house of Phaeacia has given him food, audience, and dignity. It has given us, too, a pause before the deeper waters of memory. And now, with the fire low and the hall attentive, he turns backward through time and begins the part of the journey most people think they know. The strange wandering years, each one testing not just his body, but his mind, his restraint, and the meaning of the home he kept choosing over every seductive alternative. Odysseus begins, as many wounded people begin, by trying to tell the story cleanly. Yet even in summary, the shape of loss shows itself. Troy fell. The ships turned homeward. Men who had survived one long catastrophe expected the next phase of life to be simple by comparison. But war has a way of leaving behind not peace, only vulnerability. One wrong landing, one rash decision, one delay too many, and the journey home starts to fray at its edges. The first episodes after Troy already hint at the pattern to come. There is plunder where perhaps there should have been restraint, delay where quick departure would have been wiser. Victory that turns sour because appetite lingers too long on a shore that should have been left behind. That rhythm matters. Odysseus is clever, but he is not escorted home by pure virtue. Again and again the wandering years reveal how thin the line can be between boldness and error, leadership and miscalculation, desire and doom. Then comes the land of the Lotus Eaters, and the story slips into one of its most dreamlike moods. Here, the danger is not violence. No giant lifts rocks. No goddess raises a wand. No storm darkens the sky. Instead there is a flower, a sweetness, a forgetting. The men who taste the lotus do not become monstrous. They become soft. They lose the sharpness of direction. They no longer feel urgency about return. They wish only to remain where they are, ease wrapped around them like warm haze. Memory gently dissolving at the edges. It is a deeply unsettling kind of danger, because it resembles rest. Odysseus must drag his own men back to the ships and bind them there as they weep for the ease they are being denied. In that scene, the poem reveals an insight that remains painfully modern. Not every threat announces itself as terror. Some arrive as numbness, some offer not destruction, but sedation, To lose one's suffering by losing one's purpose can feel, for a moment, like mercy. Yet Odysseus senses what his companions do not. A home forgotten cannot be regained. So he chooses the harsher kindness. He refuses the sweetness that would make the voyage unnecessary by making the self incapable of wanting anything beyond the next mouthful of oblivion. From there, the journey darkens sharply. The land of the Cyclops is almost the opposite of the lotus shore. Nothing there is soft. Nothing is communal in the human sense. The giant Polyphemus lives apart. Powerful, crude, and indifferent to all the customs that make social life possible. When Odysseus and his men enter the cave, they step into a world stripped of measured reciprocity. There is food, yes, but not the mutual obligation between host and guest that Greek listeners would have recognized as sacred. Odysseus stays, expecting some sign of hospitality. Instead, he receives the horrifying lesson that not all beings share one's moral universe. The Cyclops does not negotiate, he does not pause to ask names in courtesy. He takes human life as though courtesy, kinship, and sacred custom had never existed. The image remains disturbing because it collapses everything civilized into appetite without restraint. In that cave, there is no law but appetite backed by strength. And because brute force cannot move the stone at the entrance and cannot overpower the monster inside, Odysseus must rely on the very faculty that defines him most strongly: cunning under pressure. He offers wine, he waits, he names himself nobody, he blinds the giant in sleep. The plan is brilliant, and the brilliance feels earned because it arises not from magic, but from observation, timing, and verbal trickery. Yet the episode does not end in clean triumph. That would be too simple for this poem. Once safely at sea, with danger seemingly receding behind him, Odysseus cannot resist the old temptation that often follows successful strategy, the temptation to claim authorship aloud. He calls back his true name. He wants the deed attached to the doer. He wants intelligence to receive public acknowledgement. It is a very human failure. After fear, pride often arrives wearing the face of relief. But in naming himself, he gives the Cyclops the means to pray for vengeance, and so one victorious escape becomes the seed of years more suffering. This, perhaps, is what makes the Odyssey feel so psychologically alive. It does not merely show external peril, it shows how a person's own strengths can curve around and wound him. The same mind that invents the saving trick also longs to be recognized for having invented it. And so the ships move onward from that rocky shore, carrying men who have escaped being eaten only to discover that survival can contain the beginning of a much longer punishment. Home is still ahead, but now the sea has learned the name of the man it means to delay. The next trials teach a quieter, sadder lesson, that leadership can fail not only because the world is hostile, but because trust within a group is difficult to preserve once fear, exhaustion, and suspicion have taken root. On the floating island of Aeolus, keeper of the winds, Odysseus is treated generously. It seems for a brief shimmering stretch, as though the journey might finally straighten. The contrary winds are bound away. A fair breeze carries the ships toward Ithaca. The men can almost see the fires of home. That nearness is important. The poem knows how to make catastrophe more painful by letting hope become specific. Home is not abstract now. It is visible. One can imagine the smell of shore, the lifting of voices, the first step onto familiar ground. Odysseus, determined to protect the precious bag of winds, and perhaps also too used to carrying responsibility alone, keeps it close and says too little. His men, worn by years and not innocent of greed, begin to suspect that what he guards is treasure hidden from them. While he sleeps at last from sheer exhaustion, they untie the bag. The released winds explode outward. The ships are hurled away from Ithaca just when arrival seemed certain. There is a special bitterness in being blown back from the edge of fulfillment. Many stories know how to depict suffering. Fewer understand the peculiar pain of almost home, almost restored, almost safe. Odysseus returns to Aeolus seeking aid again, but this time the response is refusal. A man so afflicted, the Windkeeper assumes, must be hated by the gods in a way decent people ought not touch. That reaction deepens the loneliness of the voyage. Suffering, once interpreted as curse, can isolate a person even from those who might otherwise have helped. From there, the losses accelerate. The Laestrygonians, giant and cannibalistic, destroy nearly the entire fleet. The scene is swift, brutal, almost unbearable in its compression. Ships are smashed in harbour, lives vanish with terrible speed, as though the sea was swallowing whole crews in a single breath. In the space of a single disaster, Odysseus goes from commander of many vessels to captain of one. The numbers matter, but so does the emotional consequence. Every death narrows the circle of memory around him. Every ship lost makes the future return less like victory and more like survival stripped to its smallest possible remnant. When the single remaining ship comes at last to the island of Circe, the texture changes again. Here, danger is wrapped in sophistication. There is a polished house, a goddess skilled in enchantment, tame-seeming creatures that were once men, and an atmosphere in which the boundaries between desire, comfort and threat grow uncertain. Some of the crew enter and are transformed into swine, human minds trapped inside altered bodies. It is one of the poem's strangest images, yet its symbolism is almost too clear. Appetite without rule, humanity degraded into animal condition, identity made vulnerable to the forces one consumes too trustingly. With Hermes' help, Odysseus resists Circe's magic and compels terms from her. But once again, the journey is not simply about resisting annihilation. It is also about resisting delay disguised as relief. After danger comes comfort, and comfort has its own narcotic. Circe restores the men, feasting follows, bed and board soften urgency. A full year slips away on the island before the crew themselves remind Odysseus that rest has become another form of forgetting. This is one of the recurrent emotional rhythms of the whole epic. Peril, release, delay, remembrance, departure. The path home is rarely blocked in a single way. Sometimes it is the storm, sometimes it is the bed. Then Circe gives the instruction that deepens the journey beyond ordinary wandering. Odysseus must go to the land of the dead. He must seek knowledge not from sailors, kings or gods who stroll above ground, but from the blind prophet Tiresias among the shades. There is something strangely hushed, almost sleep-like, in the way the poem enters this part of the voyage. The world thins, the edges blur, the route moves toward the limits of human life and beyond them. Odysseus sails to a place where daylight feels withdrawn, performs the dark rituals, opens the old passage between worlds, and waits while the dead gather near. What he finds there is not the triumphant dominion over death that later heroic traditions might have wanted. It is encounter, sorrow, and instruction. He sees his mother, who died during his stay. Absence, he tries to embrace her and cannot. That failure of touch is one of the most haunting moments in the whole story. Love survives, recognition survives, but the body no longer serves them. He learns, too, from the dead heroes of Troy, that glory does not cancel loss. Achilles, greatest of warriors, would rather be a living labourer than king among the shades. Agamemnon, warns against trust misplaced in one's own house. Ajax still carries the old wound of rivalry. Death has not made them abstract. It has sharpened what mattered and exposed how little public fame can soothe private bitterness. The underworld does not merely provide plot information. It changes the emotional temperature of the journey. Odysseus has moved through temptation and danger before, but now he has stood where all human striving comes to silence. He has felt grief not as concept, but as failed embrace. From this point onward, home is not only something desirable, it is something mortal and therefore urgent. Return becomes dearer because the dead cannot return at all. And when he sails back toward the upper world, he carries with him a different weight than before. The weight of knowing more clearly what can never be repaired, and what, while there is still time, might yet be restored. After the dead, the living world does not feel simpler. It feels more fragile. Circe, now no longer an enemy but a guide of sorts, lays out the dangers still to come with the calm precision of someone naming weather no mortal can avoid. The sirens await, singing from their meadow of bones. Beyond them lies the strait, where a sailor must choose between Scylla, who snatches men from above, and Charybdis, who swallows whole stretches of sea into a black turning mouth. Further on waits the island of the sun god, where sacred cattle graze under a prohibition that ought to be simple to obey, and yet will prove fatal. The sirens may be the most famous, because they dramatize a temptation so many listeners immediately understand. Their lure is not merely sensual, it is intellectual, almost spiritual. They promise knowledge. They promise the fullness of hearing and understanding, the delicious feeling that nothing significant will remain concealed. Odysseus, true to his nature, does not want simply to escape their song unheard. He wants to hear and survive it, so he orders his men to stop their ears with wax and bind him upright to the mast, instructing them to tighten his bonds if he pleads or commands release. It is an unforgettable image because it captures a deep truth about self-knowledge. Sometimes the only way to honor one's desire without being destroyed by it is to prepare in advance for the moment when desire will make one irrational. Odysseus does not trust his future self in the presence of irresistible music. Therefore, he arranges to be overruled by his own earlier wisdom. Bound to the mast, straining against rope, hearing the voices that seem to know every hidden thing, he becomes both listener and prisoner, a man permitted to encounter seduction only because he has chosen beforehand not to be free in its presence. There is something almost tender in that paradox. Discipline, in the poem, is often just love for one's future home, expressed before temptation arrives. Then comes the narrower horror of Scylla and Charybdis. Circe has already told him that the choice is no true choice at all. Better to lose a few men than all, yet even when the logic is inescapable, the emotional cost remains terrible. Odysseus conceals part of the truth from his crew because there is no useful comfort in telling them that some of them are already doomed by geography. He puts on armor, though he has been warned no weapon can reach the six-headed thing above the rock. Perhaps he does it because a leader cannot bear to move passively through the sacrifice of his own companions. Perhaps armor, even useless armor, lets him feel like a man still attempting something on behalf of those entrusted to him. The attack is quick and grotesque. While the sailor's eyes fix on the whirlpool below, Scylla swoops from above and takes 6 men. Cries they utter are among the hardest sounds in Odysseus's memory. They call to him as they are lifted away. He sees their legs, their hands, their desperate motion in the air. He cannot answer with rescue, he can only continue steering. The poem is mercilessly honest here. Leadership is sometimes not glorious command, but the sustained functioning of a person who must keep moving, while hearing those he cannot save cry out his name. One might think such losses would already be enough. But the journey still has one last collapse to enact. Odysseus and his remaining crew are driven to the island of the sun god. They know the warning, he repeats it. They swear. For a while oath and hunger coexist. They catch what food they can. They wait for weather to change. But storms linger, provisions shrink, bodies weaken. The daily grind of deprivation loosens the grip of principle. When Odysseus goes inland to pray, the others break. They slaughter the sacred cattle, telling themselves perhaps that they will repay the offense later. That ritual can mend necessity. That hunger excuses what abundance would condemn. There is something terribly believable in this. Catastrophe often comes not because human beings do not know the boundary, but because they try to negotiate with it after long suffering. They tell themselves that one exception will be survivable. One meal, one compromise, one step over the line, only this once. But in the Odyssey, cosmic order does not bend so easily to exhausted reasoning. The slaughtered cattle reveal their sanctity through eerie signs. The meat seems alive, the world itself recoils, and when at last the ship leaves the island, Zeus sends the storm that ends everything. The vessel is shattered, every companion perishes. Odysseus alone survives by clinging once more to wreckage, carried back toward the murderous waters he had barely passed before. The isolation that began gradually is now complete. No crew, no ship, no shared witness, only one man left to bear the whole burden of memory. That solitude gives the later homecoming its strange severity. Odysseus will return not as a leader, bringing comrades home in triumph, but as the sole remnant of a world already swallowed. The sea has taken nearly everything external from him. What remains is internal: endurance, memory, longing, and a name now weighted by grief rather than fame. By the time the current casts him once more upon Calypso's shore, the circle of wandering is complete. And because we have already seen him there in tears, we understand the depth of all that lies behind those tears. They are not the weeping of a frustrated traveller, they are the release of a man who has outlived every companion and must still, somehow, continue toward home without the comfort of being followed by anyone who remembers the journey as he does. When the Phaeacians finally carry him sleeping over the sea and lay him down on Ithacan ground, the moment is almost anticlimactic in the gentlest possible way. No trumpet announces it, no crowd rushes toward the shore. He wakes under mist, disoriented, uncertain whether this coastline belongs to hope fulfilled or to one more deception. That uncertainty feels right after so many years of displacement. The imagination of home and the reality of home cannot immediately become one. Return requires adjustment. A remembered place must be seen again before it can be trusted. Athena appears and reveals the truth. This is Ithaca. The long circuit has ended. Yet even now there is no simple release into recognition. Instead, the goddess and the man she favors begin at once to hide the treasure gifted by the Phaeacians and to discuss strategy. The delay is essential. Odysseus has reached the island, but he has not yet reached his life. To enter that life openly, without understanding what the years have made of it, would be to risk losing everything at the final threshold. So Athena changes him, the broad-shouldered warrior, seasoned by sea and grief. He's bent into the figure of an aging beggar. His skin is dulled, his eyes are clouded, his clothing becomes ragged. The transformation is practical, of course. It protects him from immediate recognition, but it is also symbolically perfect. What has he been these many years if not a man partly stripped of the outward signs that once matched his inner rank? Storms, losses and dependence have already reduced him. The disguise only makes visible the humbling the journey has been performing all along. There is something restful, too, in the change of scale that follows. After gods and monsters and the edges of death, the poem turns toward huts, paths, shepherds, and the small morally revealing details of ordinary encounters. Odysseus goes not first to his own palace, but to the dwelling of the loyal swineherd Eumaeus. The choice is wise and emotionally meaningful. Before a house can be retaken from corruption, the returning man needs one place where welcome still exists without calculation. Eumaeus receives the beggar with a generosity more noble than that of many kings. He offers food that is plain but honestly shared. He gives shelter. He speaks of his absent master with affection and pain. He does not know that the man before him is the one he mourns, and because of that his kindness becomes even more beautiful. It is not flattery directed upward at power, it is hospitality directed downward, as it seems, toward weakness. In the Odyssey, this is one of the surest measures of character. Who can honor the stranger who looks as though he has nothing to offer in return? Odysseus, still hidden, tests and listens. He invents stories, as he always does when caution demands it. The lies are not random, they are instruments, soft probes slipped into conversation to discover what remains trustworthy around him. Eumaeus answers with the unadorned sincerity of a man who has suffered enough to stop performing. Through him, we hear more of Ithaca's decline, more of Penelope's endurance, more of the suitor's outrage, and more of the sorrow that prolonged uncertainty has spread into every corner of the king's world. Then comes one of the journey's most moving returns. Telemachus, back from his own travels, arrives at the swineherd's hut. Father and son are under the same roof before either is properly visible to the other. Athena signals the moment. Odysseus is briefly restored to his true appearance. Telemachus stares, doubts, fears divine trickery, and then slowly understands. Their embrace is not theatrical in the shallow sense. It is raw. Years collapse. The son who has lived with a name finds the man. The father who has imagined the child must meet the grown person standing before him. They weep, and the weeping feels earned because the poem has taken such care to show what absence has cost both of them. Yet even in reunion there is little leisure. The world remains dangerous. Father and son must conspire immediately. Odysseus resumes the disguise. Plans are laid. Weapons must be removed from the hall at the right time. Loyal servants must be identified. Rashness must be avoided. It is fitting that the final movement homeward should demand not one burst of heroic spontaneity, but patience, silence, and shared intelligence between generations. Before the palace itself is reached, the poem gives us one more scene of recognition, purer than human speech. Argos, the old dog, lifting his head from neglect and knowing, despite rags and altered appearance, that his master has finally returned. No one else in that moment sees truly. The dog does. He wags his tail, lowers his ears, and dies. It is a devastating little scene because it says that love, in some creatures, remains exact even after time has done its cruelest work. Argos has lived just long enough not to accompany his master, but to witness his coming back. And then there is no more postponing the hard centre. Odysseus, in the shape of a beggar, must enter his own hall and let the household show him, face by face and gesture by gesture, what it has become. To enter one's own house as an object of contempt may be a harder trial than any monster's cave. Odysseus has faced creatures that wish to devour him, but their hostility was straightforward. The cruelty of the suitors is pettier, more social, and in some ways more exhausting. It is the cruelty of men who feel secure enough in another person's home to mock weakness for entertainment. They do not know who stands before them, which only sharpens the moral clarity of their behavior. Their treatment of the beggar is the treatment they believe the low and vulnerable deserve. Some servants reveal themselves immediately in the way they greet or insult him. Melanthius the goatherd, now aligned with the suitors, kicks and taunts the ragged stranger. Eumaeus, by contrast, protects and escorts him as best he can. Already the lines are drawn, not by status but by conduct. The disguise is working exactly as it should. It strips away the distortions of rank and lets character emerge under pressure. Inside the hall, the suitors are as overfed, careless and loud as all the reports suggested. Odysseus moves among them with the begging bowl of apparent necessity, seeing from close range the men who have been draining his house day after day. Antinous, sharp in arrogance, is the worst among them, not because he alone is guilty, but because he gives the group its hardest edge of contempt. When he strikes the beggar with a stool, the act lands with more than physical force. It confirms that these men have so thoroughly forgotten the sacred claims of hospitality that they can attack a supplicant inside the very hall whose moral order they are already violating by their presence. What is astonishing is Odysseus's restraint. This restraint is one of the least flashy and most heroic qualities in the entire poem. He has strength, he has anger, he has every reason for immediate retaliation, yet he waits, he absorbs insult because timing matters more than emotional satisfaction. The sea has taught him, the years have taught him, and now his own house teaches him again. Return is not complete until it is rightly enacted. Rage may be justified and still mistimed. The man who once shouted his name in pride after escaping the Cyclops now bites back revelation in the face of abuse. Suffering has deepened into discipline. Penelope hears of the stranger and asks to speak with him. Their conversation is one of the poem's most delicate scenes because it brings husband and wife close together while leaving truth suspended between them. He tells her another careful fiction about having encountered Odysseus elsewhere. She questions him with intelligence sharpened by decades of uncertainty. Neither can move simply. Odysseus cannot reveal himself too soon. Penelope cannot permit herself untested hope. They circle one another through language, each measuring the other's steadiness. This scene is beautiful because it demonstrates how well matched they are. Lesser characters in epic often reveal themselves through directness alone. These two reveal themselves through caution. Penelope is not cold. She's disciplined by disappointment. Odysseus is not merely deceptive. He is trying to protect the fragile possibility of success from being shattered by premature exposure. Their exchange is charged not with melodrama, but with recognition deferred. He hears in her speech the woman he left behind, older now, stronger through suffering. She hears in the stranger's details and bearing something unsettlingly persuasive, yet still not safe enough to trust fully. Then comes another of the old poem's gentle and devastating recognitions. Euryclea, the nurse who once cared for Odysseus in youth, washes the stranger's feet and finds the scar on his leg, the mark left long ago by a boar hunt. The body remembers what disguise cannot erase. She knows him at once. He hushes her quickly. The revelation must not spread, but for the listener there is great emotional relief in this partial unveiling. The home is beginning to know him again, one loyal witness at a time. First the dog, now the nurse, soon others. Around these recognition scenes the poem continues to test the moral atmosphere of the hall. Another beggar is set against Odysseus for sport. A hanging contest of humiliation is staged for the suitor's amusement. Telemachus must maintain composure while standing near the father he has only just regained. Penelope proposes, at last, the trial of the bow, which will provide the occasion through which truth can step into action. All the while, the sense grows that the house itself is tightening, drawing inward toward an inevitable point. What makes this long disguised sequence so powerful is that it allows the hero to see his kingdom from below. He does not re-enter power by resuming the old vantage immediately. He has to pass through the perspective of those who are dismissed, struck, underestimated, and ignored. In doing so, he learns something that earlier kingship could never have taught him so completely. Authority is not only the right to command, it is the obligation to notice how the weak are treated when no one fears consequence. And so the hall fills one last time with laughter, music, arrogance, and the clatter of cups. The suitors believe themselves close to triumph. Penelope believes she is moving toward a final test. Telemachus believes the waiting is nearly over. Odysseus, still in rags, believes nothing publicly at all. He watches, he measures, he lets one more day ripen toward the exact moment when concealment will no longer serve. That moment will come not with speech alone, but with wood long preserved, with a string drawn tight, and with the unmistakable return of a skill no other hand in the hall can master. The bow of Odysseus has waited in storage like a sleeping line of identity. It is not merely a weapon, it is memory in shaped wood. It belongs to the vanished master of the house, to the man whose physical presence has become rumour, pain, and possibility. When Penelope orders it brought forth, and declares that the man who can string it and shoot cleanly through the aligned axe heads will win her, the announcement does several things at once. It gives the suitors one final chance to prove themselves. It allows her to move toward decision without openly yielding to any of them. And beneath all that, whether she fully sees it or not, it summons the absent husband into the center of the room through the one object that still bears the exact measure of his hand. The suitors fail, they strain, sweat, laugh nervously, blame the dryness of the wood, blame the day, blame chance. But the bow will not answer them. Their failure is more than physical inadequacy, it is symbolic exposure. These men who imagined they could slip into the life of Odysseus cannot even bend the instrument that shaped his old authority. Their appetite has made them bold, but it has not made them worthy. The loyal servants weep when the bow appears. They know what it means. Telemachus, too, has reached the point where his own role must become visible. He maneuvers quietly, helping create the conditions in which the stranger may take the bow without the plan collapsing too soon. One sees here how far he has come. The uncertain youth of earlier books is gone. In his place stands a son capable of acting in tense harmony with his father, neither overshadowed nor independent in the reckless sense, but joined. When the beggar asks to try the bow, outrage rises immediately. Of course it does. Arrogance always feels most insulted by the possibility that truth might enter from below. Yet the weapon is placed in his hands, and then the atmosphere shifts. Odysseus handles it not with brute exertion, but with familiarity. He inspects it like a musician, testing an instrument after long silence. He strings it with ease. The sound it gives is small and precise, but in narrative terms it is thunder. A thing out of place has returned to its rightful relation. The old continuity between man and object, skill and gesture, absent identity and present action, is restored in an instant. He sends the arrow through the axe heads. No one else could have done it. The room stills, recognition begins as physical fact, before it fully becomes social truth. Then, without delay, the disguise ends where it matters most. Odysseus stands revealed not by a miraculous blaze of divine light, but by deed aligned with identity. His first target is Antinous, struck down as he drinks. The feast breaks, cups spill. Men who moments before felt secure in numbers and privilege cannot at first understand what is happening. Then the words come. They are not rambling, and not ecstatic. They are indictment. He tells them, in essence, that they believed he would never return. And so they consumed what was not theirs, harassed his household, and forgot both reverence and consequence. In that speech, the struggle that follows is framed not as random violence, but as reckoning. Still, the poem is too honest to make reckoning gentle. Men fall among overturned tables, the feast dissolves into fear, apologies come too late. Bargaining comes too late, resistance comes too late. None of it can recover the order they have spent years undoing. Telemachus fights beside his father. Eumaeus and the loyal herdsman join them. Athena lends support, though not in a way that erases the need for human effort. The battle is intimate, ugly and enclosed. That enclosure matters. This is not war across fields. This is judgment inside the center that was violated. Each blow echoes against the moral fabric of the house itself. Modern listeners may recoil, and perhaps they should. The scene is meant to be cleansing and terrible at once. The Odyssey does not ask us to forget blood when order is restored. It insists that disorder, when allowed to ripen for too long, often makes restoration costly. Some late mercy is shown where it is deserved. The bard who served under compulsion is spared. The herald who was kind to Telemachus is spared. Even within fury, the poem reserves room for discrimination. Justice, it suggests, ought not become a blind appetite, merely because it has been justified by outrage. After the reckoning, the work is not yet finished, the hall must be cleaned. The openly disloyal are judged according to the hard standards of that world. Smoke of purification moves through the rooms. Sulfur burns, doors, floors, and thresholds are reclaimed. One can feel in all this the poem's deep understanding that human wrongdoing is not only moral, but spatial. Corruption settles into places. It leaves residue. A house in which boundaries have been violated needs washing in more than the practical sense. And when at last the noise subsides, what remains is not simple triumph. It is stillness after violence, a held breath after years of trespass. Odysseus has recovered his hall. He has re-established force where force was needed, but he has not yet attained the deepest part of homecoming. The rooms are cleared. Yes, the enemies are down. Yet the one person whose recognition matters most has not still placed the whole weight of belief upon him. The house, in other words, has been won back before it has fully become home again. And that is why the story cannot end with the bow, the arrows, or the dead. Its truest resolution waits in a quieter room, in a test no warrior's hand can pass by strength alone. Penelope does not rush downstairs in easy joy when told that the suitors are dead and Odysseus has returned. That hesitation is one of the wisest choices in the whole poem. Had she believed instantly, she would have become a lesser character. Instead, she remains exactly who long-suffering has made her. Intelligent, cautious, emotionally disciplined, unwilling to hand herself over to hope until hope has earned the right to touch her. The years have taught her that appearances lie, that stories can be fabricated, that longing itself can become a trap for the lonely. If this man is truly her husband, he will understand why she cannot simply collapse into trust. So she descends and sees him there, washed now of battle, clothed properly once more, but still not immediately embraced. Telemachus, fresh with filial feeling, is frustrated by her reserve. Odysseus is not. He knows what endurance costs. He knows what suspicion has had to protect in this house. He allows the test to come. This mutual respect is among the finest things the poem offers. Husband and wife do not recognize one another through theatrical sentiment. They recognize each other through equivalent depth of mind. Penelope gives the order that reveals everything. Let the bed be moved. She says, prepared elsewhere for the stranger. Odysseus reacts at once, not with vanity but with wounded certainty. The bed cannot simply be moved. He himself built it around the trunk of a living olive tree rooted in the ground. The room was shaped around it. The secret of the bed is the secret of the marriage. Something crafted, intimate, enduring and impossible to separate from living rootedness, without destroying the thing itself. Only then does Penelope's final resistance dissolve. This is the sign no pretender could know, no talebearer could invent convincingly. No god in a borrowed face could easily counterfeit. The knowledge belongs not to public renown, but to private making. In that moment, the story makes clear what it has been moving toward all along. True homecoming is not completed by martial prowess or public vengeance. It is completed by being known where one is most particular, most domestic, most fully woven into another life. The bed of olive wood matters more than the bough, because it proves not what Odysseus can do, but who he has been with one other person in the hidden continuity of shared days. Their reunion is not loud. It has tears, relief and beauty, but its deepest sweetness lies in recognition after caution. She comes to him because he has passed the only test that matters to her. He receives her without bitterness because he understands the test was necessary. Then, through the night, they speak. He tells his sufferings. She tells hers. The years are not erased. They are narrated into relation. This is part of healing too. A marriage interrupted by war and wandering cannot resume as though time politely waited outside the door. It must become larger, able to contain what each has endured separately. The poem, generous to the end, still refuses to snap shut. There is more to do. Odysseus goes to see his father Laertes, who has withered into grief and rural self-neglect. Even there, recognition comes by stages, through testing and tears and remembered details of an orchard. The family circle closes slowly, 3 generations standing again within the same frame of life. Yet outside that frame, the dead suitors still have families of their own, and the old logic of blood revenge begins to stir. Without further intervention, one slaughter could simply breed another. So the gods step in at last to impose peace where human beings, left to themselves, would continue the spiral. Athena halts the next burst of violence. Oaths are made. The island is allowed, for the moment, to rest. This ending can feel almost too merciful after so much pain, and perhaps that is part of its point. Human effort carries Odysseus astonishingly far. He endures, chooses, plans, restrains himself, fights and returns. But the final stilling of the cycle does not come from human strength alone. It arrives as grace after exhaustion, as order descending where mortal passions would otherwise keep tearing the fabric anew. And even then, the horizon is not fully closed. Prophecy still points beyond this peace, toward one more journey inland at some future time, one more strange extension of a life that can never become entirely still. That faint openness is one of the reasons the ending feels so true. Real homecomings are rarely perfect seals against future departure or future grief. They are precious precisely because they are mortal and provisional. One rests, one belongs, one is held, and beyond that there is always weather. Always time, always the next unchosen season approaching. So let us leave Odysseus there, not as a bronze statue fixed forever in triumph, but as a human being who has earned a night of recognition after years of estrangement. Let us leave Penelope beside him, no emblem but a mind and heart equal to the waiting she endured. Let us leave Telemachus within reach of the Father whose absence formed him, and whose return will not erase that shaping but deepen it. Let us leave Ithaca not transformed into paradise, but rebalanced, its ruins inhabited once more by the right names and relations. The old story lingers because it understands something our own lives still keep teaching us. We are always moving between wandering and return, between the desire to see more and the desire to belong somewhere deeply enough that being recognized there feels like rest. We lose time, we lose people, we become a stranger to ourselves, and then, if fortune allows, find a way back by increments. Not back to innocence perhaps, not back to the exact life we left, but back to a place where what we have suffered can be received, where our names are not just spoken but understood, where the bed is still rooted in living wood, even if the years have weathered us both. And if the night is already drawing softly around you, there is no need to force the ending into any hard final shape. Let the sea remain somewhere at the edge of thought. Let the island rest where it is. Let the house stand in the dark with its lamps gone low. Let husband and wife keep speaking quietly after we have withdrawn. Let the old dog sleep. Let the oars be still for now. The journey has not been forgotten, and it has not been wasted. It has only, at long last, brought a weary man close enough to home that he may finally lower his voice, set down the burden of telling, and rest inside the fragile, beautiful knowledge that he has been recognized again.